Luxury fashion is dying. It's on life support, and the final, desperate breaths of luxury are coinciding with the supposed death of democracy. I don't know about you, but it definitely feels like dark times are on the horizon, both inside and outside the fashion industry. But I am not nearly smart enough to successfully tie all of these concepts together, so I enlisted the help of my new friend, Derek Guy. Now, if you live under a rock, or if you fled Twitter as it poured gasoline on the aforementioned dumpster fire of our nation, allow me to introduce you to the menswear guy, who tweets to millions under the handle @dieworkwear. Since Derek is, thankfully, way more intelligent than me, I'm going to toss it over to him throughout the video to help us out. And since we're talking about the parallel deaths of luxury and democracy, I think it's useful to note that the birth of modern fashion was actually completely intertwined with the concepts of liberalism. Not liberalism like liberal versus conservative, you know what I mean, but rather just the classical liberal values of liberty and democracy, all that lame, boring stuff that nobody likes anymore, am I right? Anyway, take it away, Derek.
One of the important things to note about the history of dress is that there used to be very strong demarcations between the true elites like aristocracy and those of the merchant class. So an important distinction around the turn of the 20th century is that the people that owned the means of production, the people that owned the factories, dressed almost the same as the people that managed the factories. We start to take our dress direction not just from those with financial capital, but also those of cultural capital. So we take dress inspiration from workers, musicians, artists, marginalized sections of society. Those forms of dress also became considered as legitimate, something worth imitating. More people started to ditch the idea of suits because they didn't want to dress as what they saw as the establishment.
So, to condense hundreds of years into a couple sentences, prior to the 20th century, the elites wore frock coats while the merchant class wore suits. But at the turn of the 20th century, the elite and the merchant class kind of converged, with them both generally wearing suits. And then as the 20th century marched forward, people didn't just aspire to dress like the factory owners and the middle managers, but also artists, workers, musicians, and more. On the one hand, that's the melting pot of America, baby. You got Indian food over here, you got Thai food over there, you got Mexican food over there, and yes, my mental image of the melting pot of America is a literal pot melting with food. Anyway, this is like one of the core values that our country was founded on. But on the other hand, it has allowed bad actors, right, the elites, to sort of like camouflage themselves. Mark Zuckerberg looks more like a dude at the club now than your classical idea of a billionaire. By the way, I use the word elite throughout this video. I don't use it in like the conspiratorial way a lot of people do. I just mean the top classes, the bourgeoisie, right? The tippity top owners of our capitalist systems. Okay, moving on. Back to Zuck and t-shirts.
Now, a lot of people just wear t-shirts, and a t-shirt is a garment with 5 components. You have front, back, 2 sleeves, and a collar. It's sewn, with fairly straight seams. The sides are usually pretty straight. It's a jersey material. It's kind of disposable. It used to be worn as almost like underwear back in the day. And so clothes have become much simpler. And I think that's true across all classes.
Clothing itself has become simpler, easier to make, cheaper to mass manufacture. Much like democracy, fashion was once something stable and aspirational, and yet now it's degraded and disposable. Usually when I mention that, people will scream that that's
just a fast fashion problem. Sure, a Shein t-shirt is cheap and crappy, but not my Tom Ford t-shirt. That one's great.
Sure, the quality does generally rise as prices do, but it's not nearly enough to justify the price. Eddie Sliman's aesthetic, from Dior to Saint Laurent to Celine, is known for being sleek and wearable. It's unquestionably better than H&M, but not like 100 times better. The rest of that price comes merely from the perception, the mystique, both of which are crumbling in the world of luxury today.
those like Saint Laurent double riders that were popular a few years ago. There is some difference. First, they made them from softer leathers than what you would have found from, like a shot motorcycle jacket. Those like authentic quote unquote motorcycle jackets are essentially meant to protect you when you hit the ground. If you wore a Saint Laurent leather jacket and hit the ground while riding a motorcycle, you probably would die. But it's a softer leather. It gives a different silhouette. But it's true that, and you saw this happen almost immediately, as soon as those double riders became popular, there were a ton of imitations. And because the garment is not that complicated, there's no reason to believe that, I assume many of those imitations are made in reasonable factories. I personally would never buy an H&M, Zara, Shein garment because there is a certain level where you go so low that the price does not allow for quality materials and the chance of labor exploitation shoots up. You never know for sure, but as you lower the price, all of these factors that are bad, they go up. The chance of it goes up. So I personally would never shop there, but there was a Saint Laurent thread on Styleforum for a while, and there was like a ton of people talking about like alternatives. And then there were like the snobs that said, oh, you absolutely can't. I mean, to me, that's just gatekeeping. There are definitely alternatives. And if you want to buy those things, you will achieve the same look.
Imitations are nearly as good as the real thing, and the real things get lower and lower quality, and their staying power gets weaker and weaker. Just look at the shortening hype cycles for new products and releases. Open your phone and scroll a bit. The pieces that we fixate on these days are unrecognizable from the aspirational fashion of the past. In fact, even 10 years ago, they may not have qualified as fashion at all.
I do think that over time, luxury items overall, I don't mean to sound harsh, but I think that they've gotten dumber, they've gotten stupider, they've gotten more gimmicky. They have become more aimed at rage baiting, online clicks. There are certain things that Demna at Balenciaga does. What gets talked about online is like the towel skirt that he released. They become an obvious signal of wealth. That does demonstrate like a kind of dumbing down of luxury. The items become simpler to make, become more gimmicky. To me, it's sort of like memes, right? Like nobody uses a meme from a year ago because then you're like pretty lame. You might be able to use a meme from like 10 or 15 years ago that becomes ironic at that point, but like a year-old meme is like definitely dead. It's no longer cool. And I fear that that's essentially what people end up purchasing, is that they purchase fashion memes that might be wearable in 20 years when it becomes like, oh, remember that like stupid thing, but is not something that you'd wear in 2 years. And to me, then it's sort of pointless.
We're in dark times when the clothing we choose to wear is most comparable to memes. The things that we send to each other when we're sitting on the toilet that basically lose all their novelty after a single use. But that leads to a bigger question. Why? Why, of all the things we could wear, are we choosing pieces that have less and less lasting usefulness to us, less relevance in our modern age? Well, the thought leaders, and the hardest of air quotes there, okay? The thought leaders in our modern age are often people like Joe Rogan, Jordan Peterson, Ben Shapiro. Outside of traditional politics, it's people like Jake Paul or Dave Portnoy, and these are right-wing or right-leaning personalities who tend to lean on evolutionary biology to explain, like, everything we do, kind of.
What's the purpose of makeup? Why do you make your lips red? Because they turn red during sexual arousal.
Thought leaders.
Of course, we try to dress well to get mates, right? By wearing expensive, nice clothing, we make ourselves look more attractive, showing that we have good genes for the babies that we'll make and have the means, right, to provide for our wife and future children. It makes so much sense, right?
I've always believed that we dress in a way to identify ourselves with certain groups, but also express ourselves as individuals within that group. And that could be true even if your only identity is, I'm a regular dude living in the US, so you'll pick blue jeans instead of pink jeans. In the 80s and 90s, if you were part of a certain scene, let's say punk or hip hop or skate or surf or whatever, you adopted the uniform of that scene. And that to me makes sense. is that you tend to dress like your peers and you tend to signal your association with groups and your individuality within groups. I don't think that guys are dressing to get women. I think many menswear hobbyists dress to get respect from their peers.
So that rings more true to me than the mating thing. My fashion world exists within a mostly male audience on YouTube, TikTok, and Instagram. Over 90% male in my case. When I talk to fashion people, it's in almost entirely male group chats and Discord servers. Men like us are dressing to impress and flex on other men, to fit into a social group consisting of hyper-online men. And more, we're seeing online male spaces be dominated by a creeping march towards fascism. In retrospect, it seemed inevitable that this would reflect in men's fashion as well. And we should have seen it coming. All of the signals have been there loud and clear over the past couple of years. The rise of quiet luxury, right? Brands like The Row, Loro Piana, Brunello Cucinelli. It all signals a reawakened fetishism of outlandish and exploitative wealth. The trad wife, trad living trend, say that 5 times fast, it's about as conservative as it gets. Beauty brands spend less and less time marketing things as cruelty-free, right? Many boutiques have dropped the cloying, sustainable labels, right, that they put on pieces or environmentally conscious designers. I can't remember the last time I read an article about the incredible scientific advances in fake leather. Them mushrooms, right? Them mushrooms, they crazy with the fake leather, okay?
And I don't mean to imply that this is like a permanent shift. As we've already established, fashion is a reflection of the culture that it exists within. So I'm sure we will see like a rubber banding back to the left in opposition to the upcoming political administration. Just like during the first Trump term, we saw these kind of, gauche democratic, I'm with her resistance type things happening within the fashion scene. I am positive we will see that again to some degree. But my kind of fear is that unlike that previous administration where the guardrails of democracy held around the administration, it seems like he has different aims and different people around him now, and the fashion is kind of supporting that in a way rather than denouncing it or working against it.
Now, while not all of these things were necessarily good or useful in the first place, I find it telling that luxury brands no longer see a value in marketing to the progressive consumer. So if they're not marketing to you, or if they are, it's for disposable meme fashion or out-of-reach uber-wealth products, if they're not marketing to you, how do you choose the pieces that are actually right for you? The pieces that will actually serve your wants and needs?
We are all operating within groups, and the kind of vying for clout or respect or status, if you will, within those groups will drive us to consume certain things. I think that is just a natural part of us being humans, and it's fine. There are some downsides to it in that if you are constantly on, that kind of hedonistic treadmill and you're constantly buying new things to try to one-up people, I think it is bad if you buy it and then all of a sudden the people that you consider uncool, if you will, I don't know what other word to use, but people that you consider uncool or outside of your group, if those people start wearing it, then all of a sudden you think, oh, well, now I don't want to wear it. I think that then that's stupid. I wrote an article a long time ago called Emotional Durability, but I think it's a very useful idea in considering purchases. Many things nowadays are discarded long before the end of their useful life. So we throw away jeans and shirts and jewelry, you could still wear the thing, but you stop wanting to wear the thing. And that's largely because we have lost an emotional connection to the thing that we bought. And so I think a very important part of figuring out what to buy is figuring out what will give you satisfaction in 10, 15 years.
What an interesting concept, right? Emotional durability. There's wisdom in that because most of us aren't wearing our clothes to the point of a literal collapse, right? Instead, much of the time, we're throwing them out, giving them away, or selling them after just a couple wears. So if we can get from 2 wears to 20 wears and beyond, that's important movement, right? The modern fashion landscape thrives on short-term thinking. How else do you convince your customer every few months when the new season comes out to buy more pieces from them, when you've only had a chance to wear the last pieces you bought from them a handful of times? It sounds crazy when you get some distance from it, but that's literally the business model of luxury fashion brands. They get everyone to buy into it by cranking up the hype cycles and getting attention, getting notoriety, whether it's doing something with the most in-your-face silhouette, the craziest colors or materials, the most luxurious materials, or the most shocking concepts and graphics. Much like a meme, whatever grabs your attention in this crowded and crumbling society wins. And that's how you get pieces like this, the New York Young Republicans Club baseball cap. This entices me. It tickles my curiosity, but it also troubles me. You see, the brand that made this hat is called Enfant Riche Déprimé, or ERD. When you think about attention-grabbing, in-your-face designs, they are maybe the goats of it in the modern era, and they've always played with uncomfortable motifs in their designs. In early pieces like the Mickey Mouse tee or Capitalisme shirt, I think they were doing it with a sort of tongue-in-cheek punk nihilism. I never read any sincerity in their use of fascist iconography because it seemed so intentionally and obviously insincere. But this New York Young Republican Club graphic was the most popular of their last season. And to me, this hat right here is presented without irony. The same goes for a massive graphic of Stalin, the totalitarian Russian leader. They actually included a little print of it with the hat. And I know some of you keyboard warriors are going to be like,
Stalin was the opposite of a fascist, so your argument is dead.
no, loser, just because I'm anti-fascist doesn't mean I'm pro-Soviet communism. The dude was a totalitarian, authoritarian leader with at least 7 million excess deaths he's directly responsible for. So when you really think about it, he did a little Holocausty of his own out there in old Russia. Hey, ever heard of the Holodomor, you big brain loser? So yes, imaginary keyboard guy, imaginary keyboard hanky, I think this does support my thesis that fashion is reflecting our increasing extremist culture, okay? I think there was an era when ERD would have had to insert some sort of like wink and nod into these pieces for the customer to find it acceptable. But now, I think these things are accepted and even desired, unironically, by a large portion of the customer base. Even in my audience, almost 40% of people I polled unironically agreed with the Young Republican hat, and maybe more importantly, the same amount of people think that the brand ERD sincerely believes in these same politics.
And just for what it's worth, everyone I've heard from who actually has personal experience from being around the ERD crew, by all accounts, they are just sort of subcultural nerds just into these scenes from a kind of academic perspective in a sense. But at the same time, I've been thinking a lot about how irony bleeds over into reality, like sites like 4chan, where they started making racist and misogynistic and fascist jokes and things in a very ironic way. But the people who see that don't always realize that it's ironic, and it cultivates a very different type of fan base that turns into the reality, whereas it started ironically.
Customers are clamoring to spend nearly $700 on this baseball hat. In fact, they're spending thousands, season after season, to buy multiple pieces just like it. They're raising their prices aggressively every year. Why would a brand price gouge like that? Don't they realize that they're losing customers?
I would say it is a very unfortunate fact that there is a class of consumers, which absolutely includes me, this kind of like middle class aspirational consumer, that is not always the most profitable. And the most profitable is the true luxury consumer. You know, like I'll buy stuff, I'll try it on, and if it doesn't meet these like little things that I read online, and you know, like I did all this research and it has to fall this way and all, then I return it. And there is a luxury consumer that is just like spending more money, returning less, consuming less of that customer service resource. And so many brands are fleeing the people like me. I think you can still make a living in that middle tier. There are obviously many brands that do it, but it's true that it is a tougher market than if you are somehow able to tap that like real luxury consumer. The fashion market has been bifurcated towards the uber luxury, like the true luxury consumer, which is definitely not me, and then the fast fashion consumer. Those people are also like buying a ton. And then there's people like me that are just like researching like how, the seams on pants and blah, blah, blah. Like that person is annoying. I regret to say that it's a tough market in the middle. And I think that's why you see many brands fleeing that market.
The brands know this is a race to the bottom. So why are they raising prices so much? Why are they making such out there pieces? Don't they know they're driving away many of their customers? Yes, they absolutely know that they want it. They want to cultivate a customer that will buy their piece no matter what. Luxury buyers like to think of themselves as discerning. That's where taste comes from after all, right? But the most attractive buyers for a luxury brand are those that are so wealthy that they no longer discern at all. This is the customer who will buy something sight unseen, who will buy the whole collection, who will buy a piece that doesn't fit for $5,000, and instead of returning it, they just let it sit in the walk-in closet collecting dust. So who are these consumers? Who are these people who will spend a year of your salary on a single season from a single brand, and maybe do so multiple times over at multiple brands? They are the elites, the people in power, the people who are actively egging on our societal slide towards fascism, or at the very least, happily dancing on the deck of the Titanic as it sinks. Why? Because they know there will always be a lifeboat for them.
I do think that there is a class of people within the upper classes that are a little bit more countercultural in spirit, even though they're embedded in the ruling class, who try to distinguish themselves as not like the people around them.
They're the cool billionaires, man. You've probably heard that phrase before. Ignore the fact that it's an oxymoron. A lot of financial and social capital is spent to convince you that despite all the harm they do, they're with it, right? They're not like the other rich losers. This is Elon going dark MAGA, right? This is Sergey Brin signaling his hip bona fides with some Yoji Yamamoto. It's Jeff Bezos wearing a full Western-style outfit, as if that makes him seem like more of an everyman. Ignore the fact that he'll then turn around and wear a full silky Casablanca fit, also signaling just to a very different, cool crowd. The country is sliding towards collapse, but these people will be okay. These people will still have thousands to spend on fashion, but the rest of us? I don't think I'd see the point in worrying about clothes at all while living in Nazi Germany. I wouldn't see any reason to care about fashion while living in an oligarchy like modern Russia.
So you might be asking yourself, what's the issue here? What am I so worked up about? That rich people are rich? No. Well, yes, but no. But also yes. No, what upsets me is that the ruling class is building a separate and unequal fashion landscape that mirrors the growing wealth inequality in our society, while obscuring the fact that that's what's happening. We're all wearing t-shirts and jeans and hoodies and sneakers. They look virtually the same, but the richest of the worlds are 10 times as expensive, with the gap growing ever bigger, while they feed everyday people disposable slop that to the common consumer is indistinguishable. And they give us two choices. You can try to play in the same space as them, be an imposter in their world. That's what I do as the aforementioned aspirational consumer. Or you can eat the slop they shovel to you, both of which only push them further away from us as our wallets empty to fill theirs.
And as that's happening, the modern trend cycle is upholding and reinforcing the very same forces of political and financial power that are working to ensure we cannot change this for the better under any circumstances. You can and should argue that fashion is not the ideal way to fight these societal battles that stand in front of us. But it's the only realm in which I have a voice, and as long as progress is possible, it's worth pushing for. But hey, you know what? It's all good. I've got my young Republicans hat, right? I'm gonna keep calm and carry on. That's sarcasm, if you couldn't tell. So, what about Derek? Is he as pessimistic about fashion as I am?
Talking about clothing, I am unfortunately pessimistic. People call me and say, can I get a quote for a story about how people care more about quality and people are consuming better? I don't think that's true. I don't see it ever being true. I think that's true for a small segment of the clothing market. I think the majority of people will continue to buy the cheapest possible garment possible, and that will generally put downward pressure on wages, on workers, leading to more exploitation. I think that it leads to crappier materials. I think people will continue to chase trends, which means a faster trend cycle, given the way that fast fashion is set up. We've made it so that people can dress however they want, which is a good thing for people like you and me, people who love fashion. The downside is that for the average person who is not as informed, the market's much more confusing, which leads to a lot more shopping and bad outfits and cycling through things, which leads to more wasteful consumption, which means more environmental impact. Within fashion, I'm pessimistic. On a grander kind of view of the world, I still believe that, arc of history is long and bends towards justice.
Derek has a lot more hope about the state of the world than I do, and maybe he's right. Maybe a generation from now, we turn it around. We fight off the fascists, we rebuild a liberal society, but the modern culture is illiberal at this point. The brands that we follow are promoting illiberalism knowingly or unknowingly, so we've got to call it out when we see it. I want to thank Derek sincerely, truly, for joining me on this descent into darkness. He was incredibly generous with his time and really did enlighten me on many topics. So make sure that you follow him at Dye Workwear on Twitter, read his pieces on his blog. He's legitimately one of the good ones. So let me know down below what you think about all this. Do you agree with me? Disagree? Am I way off base? What do you think about graphics like this, the irony, the non-irony, the rightward shift and everything? I'm so curious to know your thoughts. Thank you so much for watching. Take a look at the other video on screen here. Like, comment, do all these engagement-y things that help me in the YouTube algorithm, and I'll see you next time.